Language is how do we develop language. As you can tell, it's obviously not that in depth of a chapter as far as language is concerned. Um, One theory, obviously, you guys know who B.F. Skinner is now. He was a strict behaviorist, believed in operant conditioning. The operant response is if it's reinforced, you're more likely to do it again. Um, and so he believed, obviously, language comes from the whole idea of imitation and reinforcement. And you can see this a lot in little kids. Parents will teach their kids how to say words and they'll reinforce them by being excited or happy or whatever it might be when the kids say words that they're supposed to say. And so they use a system of reinforcement and imitation where they model the behavior, or sorry, they model the words that the kids are supposed to say. So that's one way that, like I said, is very common. You'll see this a lot, especially with younger children when they're learning a language. But it doesn't really take into account for how kids can then take words that they know and then form new sentences that they've never heard before. Based on Skinner's model, they would have had to have heard every single sentence that they say. They would have had to have heard it before at some point and been reinforced for saying it, and that's obviously simply not true. And so Noam Chomsky, who was a very famous linguist, and he did a lot of work in psychology and how we use language. He obviously opposed Skinner's ideas, and his main opposition is that, kind of like I said before, is that children can not only regurgitate words or phrases or sentences that have been said to them, but they can create their own sentences, and at the same time, they're able to acquire language so quickly that it cannot be explained through certain things like reinforcement. So therefore, there has to be an inborn biological wiring for us to learn language. And once again, that is fairly widely accepted because of what we know now about the human brain with the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area and all that stuff that we learned in the previous chapter about how human beings are wired to acquire language, whereas other animals are not. And to delve deeper into a little bit more of Chomsky's theory of language, he essentially says there's two different parts of language. There's surface structure, which is the actual wording of the sentence. So it's the grammar, the way it's put together. That is the surface structure. How does the sentence look? And then you have deep structure. That's what does the sentence mean? And so he's saying that depending on what language you learn or what grammar rules you learn, even in different regional dialects, maybe within a country or within a certain language, they all have certain structure, which is the way a word or sentence looks, excuse me. But you can have different surface structure, but the same deep structure. So for example, if I tell you you picked up a caterpillar or a caterpillar was picked up by you, they have different surface structure, but the deep structure is the same thing. They both mean that you understand that you could picture yourself picking up a caterpillar in either one. And so surface structure does determine the way we think about things, and it can alter the way we think about things differently if the surface structure is different, but at the same time the deep structure means the same thing. And to kind of go a little bit more into depth into that whole idea about how words can influence the way we think, Benjamin Whorf came up with what is known as a theory of linguistic relativity, or it's also known as the Whorf hypothesis. And those of you who are in IB students who are in TOK, I'm sure you've heard of something like this before. And it's the fact that the differences in the languages that we learn and we grow up with can influence how we think and perceive about our world. And this is the idea that certain words, when used either in writing or speaking or in different languages, will alter the way we change, or will alter the way we think about certain things. And I kind of gave you an example in class a couple weeks ago when I talked about Tversky and Kahneman's availability heuristics, and when they did the experiment and they showed a car accident and they asked half the participants how fast were the cars going when they hit each other, and the other half of the participants he asked how fast were the cars going when the cars smashed into each other. Alright, just changing that one word completely changed people's perspective about how fast the cars were going. Alright, everybody saw the same accident, they were going the same speed. People just believed when they heard smashed into each other that the cars are going so much faster. That's an example of how different surface structure can change the way we think about certain things. But then obviously this goes into when you're talking about cross-cultural analysis, talking about the differences between different cultures who speak different languages. There's certain words that certain people have in certain languages that others do not. Like the idea of Schadenfreude in Germany, or in the German language, the idea that you can be happy at somebody else's grief. We don't have a word for that in English, and so some psychologists will say that shapes the way certain people view that concept because they have a word for it and we don't. Um, there's some cultures that don't have a word for maybe. You either do something or you don't do something. And so if we have a word for maybe, that can alter the way you perceive how things get done if you don't have a word for maybe. Because if you are in a culture that has a language that doesn't have that word, then you either have to do something or you don't do something. You fail at doing it. There's no in between there, whereas we do. So that's another example of the theory of linguistic relativity. So those are just a few more terms that you have. And that's really essentially it, other than a little bit on animals and language, which of course they do not have language, they only have communication. But you can read you should have read all about that in the book already. So we will see you in class on Monday, and I hope you enjoyed your long weekend.